Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them. Then come back and offer your gift. Now over to Matthew 18, verses 15 to 18. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church, and if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as if they were a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And thankfully, Pastor Collette is going to elaborate on that. Pastor, let me pray with you. Loving Father, we praise you for our pastor. We praise you for the wisdom and the patience and the service that she brings. And guide her in the words that you've given her today, that we may understand how to show love to those around us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a story. New York City is a city of secrets. And a man who called himself Mr. Apology knew more than 100,000 of them, thanks to his apology line, which let people call in and anonymously confess their misdeeds. This is the poster that he created and put up all over town with the little number to call. And the promise that he made to those calling in was that it was no risk. He told them to call from a payphone and never give their name, and they could just unburden all the tough, bad stuff they'd done and feel better. Okay? But he got more than he bargained for, because he lost several friends and years of his life to this venture. And it all started because he needed to do this himself. Alan, Mr. Apology Bridge, was a professional artist with a few gallery shows under his belt when he moved from Washington, D.C. to New York City in 1977. And you can tell that because it looks like it wasn't done on a new computer, this poster he was putting up. Carpentry helped him to make ends meet, but so did shoplifting. And then the guilt got to him. So in 1980, he papered downtown neighborhoods with this flyer encouraging people to call in and apologize for their wrongs without ever jeopardizing themselves. The phone line connected to an answering machine in his West Chelsea loft. The callers all started calling in. Immediately they started confessions of violence, murder, infidelity, theft. And so Alan was interviewed by the Soho Weekly News and played the reporter a recording of someone who claimed to beat and rob gay men. After the article ran, a detective left a message on the line wanting to hear that particular call again. The apologist's mode of operation seemed to match the unsolved murder in Chelsea. Alan did not want to betray his promise of keeping all these confessions confidential and anonymous, so he came up with a compromise. He was due to be interviewed on NPR, so we tipped off the police that he would play that confession on air if they wanted to hear it again. It's unknown what became of the case, but the detective never called a second time. By 1983, voyeurs could phone in and listen to people's confessions, getting some kind of a jolly over that. The calls were from child molesters, a man who claimed to kill his mother, someone who had vowed to murder Alan. "We were scared," said his wife, Marissa. "In 1980s New York City, if someone said they were going to kill you, you believed them." But she also recalled being touched by a teenage runaway's call. She was sorry for leaving home because she did not feel loved. And she came to New York City, lived on the streets, and was very lonely. And she wanted to go home. Occasionally, Alan would pick up a call as it came in and talk to the person, especially when someone sounded suicidal. But it became all-consuming. Would you like to have your voicemail full of these kinds of calls? The line grew to include extensions to push, 1 for crime, 2 for cheating on your wife or husband. Alan launched a fanzine. HBO made a movie about him entitled Apology. It was the only time he made any money off this project. By the early 90s, his wife said Alan was unraveling. Okay? It wasn't doing well for him. It took up his whole life. He slept very little, and he didn't do carpentry or paint at all anymore. Keeping up with everything was a Sisyphean task, and the calls got dark. Having started the line as a place for sinners to unload with hopes of healing, Alan was frustrated when people called in and showed no remorse. And in fact, some sounded as if they were bragging about what they'd done and gotten away with. Finally, in 1995, Alan was 50, and he decided it was time to do something else with his life. Good call. He was illegally scuba diving in Shinnecock Inlet on Long Island when fate made the decision for him. Alan was coming up out of the water, and a jet ski hit him. The guy made a circle and just kept going. Alan died as the result of this hit and run. The incident received plenty of press attention at the time, especially given who he was, but the jet skier was never caught. And that begs a question. What would Mr. Apology want from the person who killed him? For him just to call in and say, "I did this thing and I just kept driving my jet ski"? Marissa, his wife, said Alan would tell that person to go apologize. He'd want that person to go and not carry around their guilt. Apologizing is a release of pain. But tell me, my friends, were those 100,000 calls that Alan Bridge received even apologies? They're trying to somehow relieve the guilt, but they don't want any consequences. Is that an apology? Absolutely not. And is a purpose of the apology to relieve your own sense of guilt? Or is there a higher reason to make a true apology? So I would like to make a case that the reason you make an apology is because you care about the eternal destiny of the person you've hurt. That you know that if you don't go and make amends, they might get mad and their anger might turn into resentment. And that resentment might become a poison. Book of Hebrews calls it a root that strangles. If you don't make the apology, it might actually mean that the other person would be lost. If that pain, that hurt, created that kind of result. My sister Janine married a young man when she was a junior at Walla Walla. And he had been a student missionary the year before and had had an affair with a girl in Africa. So they got married early. They didn't know what they were doing, very, very young. And that girl from Africa figured out where Janine's husband was and came to the U.S. and pursued him. And her young husband moved to Washington, D.C., saying, I'm going to go and get a job and find a place to live. I'll call you when I'm ready. And he never called her. So she had this horrible months of waiting for that husband of hers to call in. That was the end of her experience as an Adventist. This young man now married the girl from Africa and is an elder in his church. And my sister isn't really a practicing Christian. Okay, that is just an illustration. When you do something horrible that's going to hurt another person's life, there's something that needs to be done somehow to make it right. So Ken Sande explains this idea of eternal consequences when we hurt each other in the book, The Peacemaker. If you haven't read Ken Sande's book, The Peacemaker, I highly recommend it. It's kind of dry. That's why you need me to provide the illustrations. Right? I add the illustrations. But basically, what Ken Sande says is our role in conflict is to use it as an opportunity to show God's grace and to give him honor and glory by how we respond with humility and compassion when things are going really wrong. Okay? And this is what Ken Sande says. You need to acknowledge that when you hurt the other, you violated God's character. Repentance is about more than acknowledging suboptimal behaviors. It is an admission that I misrepresented the character of God whose name I bear when I call myself a Christian. A Christian means literally a little Christ, when the title was first given in Acts 11:26. When we go to make amends and seek forgiveness, we are saying, I failed my life purpose to be an ambassador of Christ, showing his love to you. And I want to clarify what I have distorted. Let's together consider what Jesus is like. Okay? So, and I just want to say that this stuff is hard to do. And most of us don't really do it, the stuff I'm going to talk about today. I know there's cases that I have not done this correctly. And I believe that as a community of faith, we need to encourage each other to do it the way Jesus told us to. Okay? And that means if you witness someone doing it not the way Jesus told us to, is to call them on it and say, wait a minute, let's back up. What did Jesus say? Okay? Even me, please do that. All right? If you see that I am not making amends when they're necessary. If you see that someone else is not making amends. Okay? So this is a grow area. And by the way, the church is a laboratory or a classroom where we get to come together and beat each other's rough edges off. You know? Basically, we're all porcupines, and when we get close, sometimes we get prickled. But as we come to church, it reveals to us some of the unformed places in our hearts and minds that need help and need work. And so, this is what we're called to do, is to encourage these specific behaviors in each other. Okay, so let's start looking at the scriptures. The Sermon on the Mount, Jesus made it clear that ruptured relationships have serious consequences. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to people long ago, 'Do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.'" Okay, this is common moral practice in most cultures and societies, right? That murder is not acceptable. Okay? But Jesus ups the ante in the next verse because he says, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment." So now it's not just murder, it's anger. Especially anger that persists over time and becomes resentment. So tell me, have any of you ever been angry with a Christian brother or sister? Okay. And so if we still have a relationship with God, that's mercy. Okay, God is expressing mercy to us. And then Jesus continues here, anyone who says to his brother, "Raka," which is like a slur that's saying, "You're so awful, you're a piece of dirt," is answerable to the Sanhedrin. They used to pull them into court if they were calling each other names. All right? But anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fires of hell. Have you ever called someone a fool? You know, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is the incredibly high standard that all of us have failed. We call each other names. And sometimes in the process, we endanger our own spiritual health and the spiritual health of the other person. All right? Then verse 23 begins, "Therefore." Okay, little bit of expository Bible teaching. When you see the word "therefore," what does it tell you to do? Yeah, ask what it's there for. Yeah. And to tie what's already been stated to what's going to be stated. Okay, so Jesus was saying, this is the reality, therefore, this is what you need to do. All right? It ties the verses together. It says, given the fact that disagreements and misunderstandings and name-calling can have eternal consequences, pursuing peace is something you should never put off. Pursuing peace is a priority if you're a Christian with the Spirit in your heart. Okay? It takes priority in this verse, even over what? Giving an offering, paying your tithe, writing that check. And it takes priority, I believe, over worship. But how many of us have ruptured relationships and we just continue to come on and do business as normal? All right? But Jesus said it's a priority. First, go and be reconciled. Pursue peace. Go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come back and then you can really worship. Then you will have a free heart to give that offering and worship. But notice in this verse, who takes the initiative? Okay, in this one, is it the offended or the offender that takes the initiative in this verse? The offender. So if you are aware that someone is angry with you, you need to go. All right? You need to go and make it right. And when should you do that? As soon as possible. And according to the verses ahead of it, why? Yeah, but we do. So why is it that this needs to be a priority? Because the salvation of both of you may be at stake, and you're both valuable to God. Right? Okay, this is really heavy. I'm sorry, but once in a while you got to get heavy. Okay? The gospel calls us to value the salvation of others. Would you say that you value the salvation of others? Right. That is why we do all the things we do, right? That is why Fran works so hard in the thrift store. That is why Glenn is constantly writing and giving away books. That is why we do the homeless meals. That is why we do everything we do, is because we value the salvation of others. So those that value the salvation of others should be the world's best apologizers. The quickest apologizers, right? Not the last, not the ones that drag their feet and eventually give something half-hearted, right? But the very best. A true follower of Christ will make an effort to understand the feelings of others and will stay humble enough to acknowledge her part or his part of the misunderstanding or conflict whenever they occur. Our willingness to admit that we were wrong, to apologize for hurting the other human being, is part of what allows that relationship to be restored. Staying sensitive to others and prioritizing their spiritual needs is what Jesus taught us to do. And when we do that, we are being like him. We are to pursue peace. The word pursue, what kind of a word is that? A very active word. Is it you just try once and then you give up? It is this idea of chasing it until you have attained it. Pursuing peace means it might take some time for peace to be reestablished. It is something you're going to have to work at, for some cases, for years, to actually get all that garbage worked out and to be completely reconciled again. Matthew 18:5 describes the opposite situation. Now, in Matthew 5, it's you have offended someone else. Matthew 18, it's someone else has offended you. These are both the teachings of Jesus, okay? And Jesus says, if you've offended someone else, you be the first one to go. He also says, if someone has offended you, be the first one to go. In other words, who's responsible? You are. Whoever loves Jesus, whoever has Jesus in his heart, whoever has a conscience that works is the one who is responsible to begin that crucial conversation that can lead to reconciliation. Okay? So, sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, I don't need to go, I'll just forgive, without having to go have that stressful conversation that's really, I feel vulnerable and I feel stressed. And how do you know when you need to go and tell the other person that you've been hurt? The litmus test. How do you know you need to do this? If it continues to be on your mind, and if you start talking about it. Okay? Because there is a little phrase in this verse. Can you see it? Just between the two of you. Okay? And we have a habit of talking about each other and not talking to each other. Isn't that right? And if it bothers you enough that you have to talk to someone else about it, then it bothers you enough you need to go and have that hard conversation. That make sense? Is this easy? No, it's hard. But you know what's harder? Is to have those broken relationships that last for years or generations. It's harder at first, but it's much, much easier in the long run when we do it Jesus' way. All right? Hebrews 12:14 tells us, make every effort to live in peace. Every effort. Okay, tell me, have you made every effort to live in peace? And if you do the 12 steps, you do the 9th step. Anybody know what you do when you do the 9th step? You make a list of everyone you have ever hurt, and you systematically go back and make amends. Would that be fun? Would that be easy? Why do they make addicts do that? They can stop feeling the guilt. They can take responsibility for their own actions, and they can start to rebuild their life. There is healing in making amends that you cannot get by calling in a phone line. Okay? There is healing in actually doing everything you can do to begin to restore the broken relationships in your life. All right? Now, notice this verse has two ideas. It says to live in peace with all men, and what? And to be holy. Is it possible that these are two sides of the same coin? That living in peace with all men and being holy are synonyms. Okay? And when we tolerate living with unresolved conflict, it eats away at our holiness. It eats away at our confidence that we have in Jesus. Okay? And then it says, without holiness, what? No one gets to see the Lord. And Jesus kind of said something like that. He says, if you don't forgive other people, you're jeopardizing your own forgiveness. That's hard. That sounds like he's being tough on us. But actually, he just wants us to live in peace because that's a better kind of life. Right? He's not being mean without a reason. He's saying, this is the life that will not only make you the best witness for me, this is the kind of life that will make you live with joy. This is the kind of life that will make you happy. All right? Okay, so pursuing peace and being holy are basically two sides of being like Jesus. So it means that we have to care about loving our brother more than keeping ourselves comfortable. To care more about our brother's salvation than how hard that conversation might go and how it might be misunderstood. We need to be courageous and humble enough to go and make amends when we have hurt someone else. Or courageous and humble enough to go to someone who's hurt us if we're still harboring it, and it's weighing us down. So we can direct repentance toward a person we have offended, and we call it an apology, and Christians need to be good at apologizing. And I probably will do a second sermon that talks specifically about what a good apology looks like. Would you like to have a little training in that too? Yeah, because this is important. And hopefully you see from the scriptures how important it is. Notice something crucially important in Matthew 15. Who should be involved? Just the two of you. And so when you feel the need to share with other people, it's just making the problem get a whole lot messier. If we take Jesus' command here seriously, we who are in the small group or at the men's breakfast or wherever we are, and we hear someone beginning to try to sort out their feelings, what is it we should say? Have you gone to talk to this person? Can I help you get ready to go talk to this person? Can I pray with you as you go and talk to this person? You see that? And so often we are all complicit because we just take it like it's no problem. Here we are, a spiritual community, and we're bearing each other's burdens. But in the process, we are not doing what Jesus said to do. Ooh, that hurts. So, if you hear me saying something just a little negative about anybody else, what are you supposed to say to me? Have you talked to that person? Right? Because I need this too. I will really admit I need this. All right? So, do you think we could make a covenant with each other that we would do that? Do you think it might make everything feel a little safer if we did that? Hopefully. So, it might seem easier not to talk to this person, but in the long run, God wouldn't tell us to do it this way unless it was the best way. Right? Because you damage all the people that hear your grievance as well as the person you're talking about. And you damage yourself. Because there's a really weird thing that we do psychologically. When we rehearse a grievance, we tend to exaggerate. And as we exaggerate, we make the other person's behavior worse than it was, and our behavior better than it was. Right? And the more we say that, the more that becomes our reality, which is really distorted and not the truth. All right? As we rehearse our grievances, it actually makes the conflict much, much, much worse, even for the person who's doing the sharing. Dick Tibbet's book, Forgive to Live, describes that in great detail. It's very, very helpful to understand that. But worst of all, we misrepresent the character of Christ because his love covers a multitude of sins, right? His love covers a multitude of sins. And if our love doesn't cover a multitude of sins, then we're not really representing who he is. And this is the Amplified Bible that I really liked the way it read, because it explained at the end, covers a multitude of sins. It overlooks unkindness and unselfishly seeks the best for others. So we're not just doing this because it's good for us. We're doing it because it's good for the other person too. All right? Hebrews 12:15. It says, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up it's called the bitter root that grows up, and it causes trouble. And what's the last phrase? Okay? So if I have unresolved bitterness, is it going to just go away? What's it going to do according to this verse? It's going to grow. Our grudges, our little grudgettes, become grudges and then become grudges, right? If we don't spiritually do the work that Jesus told us to do, those grudges get bigger and bigger and bigger, okay? And it will get spread and it will leak out into the community. And what will it do? Defile many. Okay. So Yiddish folklore offers a telling tale about those who like to share their grudges. All right? One such man had told so many distorted, malicious untruths about the local rabbi, and then that man came back and by remorse begged the rabbi to forgive him. And maybe you've heard this before, but it's really good. And Rebbe, tell me, how can I make amends with you? The rabbi sighed. Take 2 pillows, go to the public square, and therefore there cut the pillows open. And then shake for all you're worth. Wave them in the air, and then come back. So the rumor monger quickly went home. He got the pillows and the knife, and he went to the square, and he did exactly what the rabbi told him. And he hastened back to the rabbi's chamber, saying, "Okay, I did what you said." "Good," the rabbi smiled. "Now, to realize how much harm you've done, go back to the square and collect all those feathers." Okay? So when that root of bitterness grows and it gets shared, the effects are far-reaching, very far-reaching, and it's really difficult. If the offended one has tried to go and explain his feelings and it has not been received, and this sometimes happens, sometimes they just can't hear it, okay? What does Jesus say needs to be the second step? Take someone with you, one other person. Is that the entire small group? Okay, it's not. It's one other person. Someone that you trust spiritually. And it's good to pick a person that the offended person feels as their friend is on their side too. Don't gang up on him or her. You don't want to do that. So you take 1 or 2 others along so that there's someone else with maybe a little better perspective hearing both sides and hearing if there is repentance on the part of the person making the apology. Being able to say, yes, I sense that there is true remorse over what has happened. And so you keep working. But does that always solve the problem? Nope. So there's a specific sequence. If the offender won't even listen when you go with an extra person, then what do? You take it to the church. And only then do you take it to the church, right? We don't need our church board busy with each other's problems, right? But if you've gone through the steps and you're just not getting anywhere and you've been praying hard and humbling yourself hard, then eventually Jesus says, yes, then take it to the church. And what does it say the church should do? Treat that person like a pagan or a tax collector. And tell me, how did Jesus treat pagans and tax collectors? He loved them. He actually gave special attention to them, right? He welcomed them. Does this mean we shun people? Absolutely not. It means these people don't understand grace because they've been appealed to with an apology, a true apology, and that they just need some extra TLC. You have to start completely over with that person and begin again to try to tell them how good God is. Okay? So Paul described what this might look like in Romans 12, 20, and 21. And I have to say, in my home, I have a husband that gets irritated at me because he doesn't think I pay enough attention to him. And it may be very, very true. And when he expresses that he's feeling a little neglected, I make cookies. Okay? I hate to tell you how many thousands of cookies I have made in my lifetime. Okay? But you know what? Those cookies work. When I make cookies and I come down with a plate of warm cookies and I rub his neck and I tell him I'm sorry, it seems to work better than if I just say sorry, right? So what you do when you're treating someone as a pagan or a tax collector is you consider what they really need and start serving very intentionally. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. And there's a whole gamut of theological discussion about what those burning coals mean. And maybe that's for another sermon too. And then he finishes by saying, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So if you've done everything you can, you've gone through the 3 steps and it's still not working out for you, what do? You love that person, right? You serve that person. Okay? Sometimes there's nothing more you can do. And so then you just have to hand it to God and say, show me the next step whenever you want me to take the next step. I can't fix this. I cannot fix it. But remember, Jesus told us to do something. To pray. To pray for that person that is holding the grudge, right? You pray for them. And you trust God to work it out in his time and in his way. And I find great solace in Romans 12:18. This is like one of the most important relational verses in the Bible. It says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So tell me, can we live at peace with everyone? Even when we've done everything possible. You can try. And what I see in this verse is God saying, sometimes it takes time. Let it rest. Sometimes the other person just needs time. So you do everything you can, and then you give it to God. And just say, okay, you got to work your miracles because it's beyond me. And not beat yourself up because someone dislikes you, right? Not wear a heavy burden because you hurt someone's feelings, and even after you went through all the steps, it just has never been resolved. Instead, just rest in God's goodness to you and to the person who still is bearing that resentment. Okay, so I have a question that's pretty hard. How many of us actually work through these steps? How often do we really do this? Is this our modus operandi? It should be. Usually, most of us wimp out. And we might do step 1, and if that doesn't work out, then we just say, well, we have a disagreement and it's not going to work out, instead of doing all of the rest of the steps. Hebrews 12:14 tells us, to make every effort, where it's back there, Alois. Okay, make every effort. So Jesus told us what those efforts should look like, and we just need to decide we're going to be obedient in this way. Let's covenant as God's body to not stop trying, not give up or wimp out until we have worked everything we know and can do. Okay, now I have a beautiful little illustration, and I love this. Anybody know what that is? It's a kintsugi, which is a Japanese art form. Kin means gold, and sugi means to mend. It's deeply gospel-centered. Kintsugi masters, they're artists, take shattered vessels and repair them with gold. What is gold a symbol of in the Bible? Purity and love. Okay? And the restored pieces are so coveted that they often are much, much more valuable than the original vase was. For example, can you guess how much this vase is worth? Yeah, 20. $20,350. Okay. How valuable is a human soul that has been mended? Okay? And the beautiful thing about how this process works is the kintsugi master spends extended periods of time before he gets the gold out just looking at the pieces, trying to understand how they're going to fit and where they each go, and he wants to completely understand each of them. So when finally he gets the gold out, he knows exactly where to put everything. We can't rush this process. Now, Jesus says go immediately. But if it doesn't work out, then go back and really pray and think, what have I done that's made this worse? What's my piece in this? What can I apologize for that will be the first step in working this out? All right? Only after the kintsugi master is intimately familiar with the jagged edges does he begin to apply the adhesive. And the process takes a long, long time. It results in a vessel whose cracks aren't hidden, but accentuated in gold. Right? Kintsugi is taking broken ceramics and saying, this is not the end. This is just another beginning. And if we could say that when we are reconciled to a brother or sister that we have had conflict with, this is not the end of our relationship. This is just the beginning, and it will be more valuable because we have done this work. The shattered vessel in the hands of a skilled kintsugi master becomes a new creation rendered more beautiful because of its brokenness. And it's a perfect analogy for the church, because we all come dragging ourselves here, and we all come broken. Every single one of us come broken. But we can be together a showcase of what grace can mean in broken human relationships. And Jesus said, they will know you by your love. Okay? That's hard.